Good morning. My name is Jeff Tumlin. My clients around the world would kill to have the qualities that Silicon Valley enjoys. It is basically perfect for cycling. In Moscow, where they have real winter, in Abu Dhabi, where they have intense summer, in cities around the world like Grand Rapids that do not have the resources that Silicon Valley does, they are doing more to make biking an everyday activity than we're doing here in the Valley, despite our every advantage. And obviously, there's a gazillion good reasons why we should be investing in biking. It's good for the environment, it's carbon neutral, it does all sorts of great things. But there are a couple of really critical reasons for Silicon Valley about why, in fact, we really have to be investing in biking. One is health. The movie WALL-E accurately predicts the public health outcomes of autonomous vehicles when they become ubiquitous and allow us to travel door to door. We need to make sure that we're investing in public infrastructure that supports the basic health needs of the human body. But the other reason is really about the Silicon Valley economy. As Russell said, we're not widening freeways anymore in order to accommodate our growth. There is a magic to the geometry of the bicycle which allows us to move at least 10 times as many people per square foot of asphalt than we can in a car, even an autonomous car. And so if we want to continue to grow our economy, we've got no choice but to invest in more space-efficient modes of transportation. And right now, we've got a long ways to go. As Russell said, the average bike-to-work rate in Silicon Valley is a pitiful 1.7%. And it's understandable. It's horrible biking through much of the valley, with a couple of prominent exceptions. Notice the big fat bar on the graph. That is the Stanford University employee bike commute rate at 44%, which works in part because Stanford has invested in infrastructure. But Stanford has also stopped subsidizing parking for cars about 20 years ago. You can't complain about traffic congestion and at the same time pay people to drive. And so this leads us to a conundrum here in Silicon Valley about the level of subsidy that we're providing for accommodating driving while complaining that so many people are driving. It also results in streets that are miserable to ride on. Like not only, the typical arterial that forces people on bikes to share the road with cars, but even some of the streets that we're proud of on the map that have bike lanes. That's a miserable street there on the left to bike on. There's that little 6-inch white stripe provides no level of protection from the traffic that's traveling at 45 or 50 miles an hour adjacent to those cyclists. But things get even worse when we have to try to cross the expressway network or travel on any of the major arterials. This area has some of the scariest intersections, and scary for all modes of transportation. Check out the bike lane on the left there. That's halfway between the double right high-speed right turn lane and high-speed through traffic. It's really scary, and it gets even scarier when you've got to cross a freeway. On the left is Shoreline Boulevard. This is my bike ride to the Google campus, where the bike lane just unceremoniously ends in the middle of the bridge, with a high-speed right turn lane heading to the freeway on-ramp where cars are accelerating, right? Not looking for the cyclists to their right. Fortunately, as it's already been mentioned, the city of Mountain View is making immense investments in Shoreline Boulevard in order to fix some of those problems, including this other one of my favorite problems, which is the beautiful Permanente Creek path that leads to a great bridge over the freeway and then unceremoniously ends at a median barrier on Charleston that prevents the connection further down the creek. So what do we do to improve things? I think we already know a lot of the answers to this, and part of it has to do with just getting better infrastructure and focusing on infrastructure that is not just about the 28-year-old Lycra-clad white guys on their racing bikes, but focusing on the rest of us all, right? I mean, at least 80% of people in our region are interested in biking if only a basic level of infrastructure could be provided. And if we can, particularly here in Silicon Valley, bridge some of those critical gaps that we always run into when we're out on the bikes, whether it is the railroad tracks or an expressway or a freeway, these expensive pieces of infrastructure need to be seen as unlocking The vast networks that we've built but are still discontinuous, our discontinuities in our network make the value of all of our past investments not what they should be. And these investments in connectivity unlock the value and accessibility of the entire county. But more importantly, we need to be investing in smarter, more modern infrastructure. Most of our cities in their engineering departments are still kind of stuck in a 1950s view of the transportation world. And we need a more modern toolbox of design techniques, including things like protected intersections, which, again, Mountain View is investing in on Shoreline Boulevard, and other cities are starting to experiment with. Or like Menlo Park has done, using low-cost tools in order to provide separated bikeways on major high-speed facilities, making key connections to the Dumbarton Bridge. Better connections to bike paths, breaking through obstacles that will allow low speed, low volume residential streets to be connected together so that cyclists can avoid the big arterials. Palo Alto's Bryant Street Bike Boulevard is actually one of the best facilities of its kind in the world, and is surprisingly unknown even here in Silicon Valley. In part because a lot of people don't know where to find these facilities. The networks of good bike facilities throughout the valley are secret knowledge. Most normal humans don't know how to find them, don't know how easy it is, in fact, to get around. And frankly, Gerald, Google Maps doesn't help very much to help us find those great secret hidden bikeways. So we need integrated mapping tools as well. Very importantly, we need better partnerships among our cities, between the private developers and cities, and between cities and counties and the two counties. Most of the worst bikeway problems throughout Silicon Valley happen right at municipal boundaries, right? Where City A's bike plan has a bike facility going like this, and City B has a bike facility going like this, without noticing what was happening across the municipal boundary. Fortunately, Joint Venture Silicon Valley has been sponsoring the Managers Mobility Partnership in order to bring municipalities together to deal with some of these barrier problems. But the real work, right, the real work that's getting in our way is not because we don't know the right infrastructure approaches or even that we don't have enough money. The real work is the nerdy technical mechanics of how decisions are made in municipalities. And this is the stuff that is easiest and cheapest to change and unlocks the greatest potential for being able to deliver more resources. And this includes things like just getting your staffing right, having the regional grant funding criteria reward gap closure, in order to actually recognize that filling in the little gaps in our network have far greater value than just that little quarter-mile project, because they connect 3 miles of existing infrastructure on this side with 3 miles of existing infrastructure on the other side. Staff development and training is desperately needed. In the traffic engineering field, there's no continuing education requirement. And so it is up to the nonprofit sector and our municipalities to make sure that our city staffs are getting the most recent data and knowledge about design techniques, about performance metrics, monitoring programs, and other innovations that are happening around the world, and that are in fact happening more rapidly in places like Minneapolis than they are here in Silicon Valley. We need better tools for ensuring good workflow between the planners and the engineers and the construction teams. There are many times where we've got great plans that never actually make it into correct implementation, either because the process was flawed or because the planners didn't have the adequate technical understanding in order to develop a planning document that was actually implementable. We need greater involvement in our communities, making sure that the folks who are promoting bike investment are actual normal folks rather than the people who are currently dedicated cyclists, right? What we're really interested in is the folks who are not currently cycling, not the folks who are, if we want to make a real difference in the bikeability of our communities. But there are other things that we need to do as well. And one of them is simply legalizing good bikeway design. Right now, in every single municipality in Silicon Valley, the most modern, safest techniques for good bikeway design are at best the exception to the rule, but more typically actually illegal. And so having our municipalities adopt current bikeway design guidance, particularly from the National Association of City Transportation Officials, is a really, really quick way of making sure that we get best design by default. But even more importantly, we need to change our transportation impact analysis rules. Right now, under the California Environmental Quality Act, every road widening is assumed to be a good thing for the California environment. But a bike facility is environmentally suspect. And so CEQA stands in the way of our best bike projects because we have over-relied on a single performance metric in transportation called level of service that says a person on board a 40-passenger bus is valued at 1/40th the value of somebody driving alone in a car, and a person on foot or on a bike does not matter at all. From a CEQA perspective, it's always better to narrow the sidewalk or eliminate the bike lane in order to be able to move more cars. But of course, widening that intersection just makes it that much easier to drive, which encourages more people to drive, at the same time making it more difficult to walk or bike or take transit. And so our efforts of chasing a perfect level of service are actually creating the very congestion problem that they were intended to solve. Fortunately, we have the opportunity for municipalities to change their environmental analysis criteria and bring their values into alignment with their performance measurements, particularly under the California Environmental Quality Act. But what all of this is really about is not infrastructure or planning jargon or analysis technique or travel demand models. It is really ultimately about people. One of the things that's really magical about being on a bicycle is not only is it fun and healthy, but it can also be sociable. As Nate Silver famously tweeted what seems like such a very, very long time ago, people vote Republican where there are no sidewalks. One of the things that's amazing about the bike is the way that it cultivates social trust. On a bike, you can actually stop and have a conversation. You can chat with somebody while you're biking. You can get from A to B really easily and stop off along the way at your local shop. And so when we're thinking about biking, what we should really be thinking about is designing our communities to be more inclusive, to be more sociable. That we should be designing not for vehicles, but for people, and not just for guys in Lycra, but for families. We should be designing for shopping trips, for an old lady with 3 sacks of groceries or a fashionable young woman going to pick up a beautiful new pair of shoes. Biking should be something that we should all be able to do for all kinds of trips, including simple utility trips or trips to go visit our friends or spontaneous trips or long-distance recreational trips. We should be thinking about a future in which the worst parking problem that we have is how to find your bike at the train station, right? We should be thinking about a future that is multimodal, that encourages part of every trip, including trips that are predominantly carried in an autonomous vehicle or a train, that the beginning and end of those trips should include a healthful cardiovascular activity like walking or biking. Ultimately, what we're hoping for is a future that focuses on our most space-efficient modes of transportation, that allows our economy to continue to grow without having to demolish neighborhoods again to widen highways or double-deck our arterial streets in order to accommodate more cars. What we want is really a future that focuses not just on movement, but really on happiness, on health, on community, and on beauty. Thank you very much.